won't tell the others, but you're my favorite. Hi BookTube, it's Lori from Bookishly Lori. I wanted to get on here and film a favorites of 2019. I realized that I'm very late. It's mid-March when I'm filming this, but I just started my channel and I wanted to go ahead and post my favorites of last year so that next year at the end of 2020 I can post my favorites of this year of 2020 and kind of look back and see if any authors are similar or genres, stuff like that. So I'm just gonna get started. So I'm going to save my favorite book of 2019 for the end, but I do want to mention that 2019 is the year that I read every single book that Taylor Jenkins Reid has ever written, and she has some really great books, but the one that really stood out to me was this one, Maybe in Another Life. This book was really interesting because all of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books kind of explore some kind of topic about love. You know, obviously she's a contemporary romance author, and more recently with more some historical fiction aspects. But this book was really interesting. It basically kind of sets up the premise of this girl. She's celebrating her first night back in Los Angeles, and she goes out to a bar and she bumps into her high school boyfriend. And so it pretty much takes off from two separate paths. What would she have done if she had gone home with her high school boyfriend, or if she had just said hi and bye and gone home with her best friend? How her life would have been different on those two different paths. It was absolutely amazing. I loved this book. It was so sweet and so heartbreaking, but honestly also so hopeful, because in either scenario she ends up with someone that she absolutely loves, and she ends up happy, and you know, her life works out in two completely different ways. And so it was a really good book, and it shows that I think a lot of people get caught up in like, oh, you know, if I make this certain choice, it could alter the whole course of my life, and you know, oh, if I didn't date him or if I didn't do this, I'll never know and my life is horrible now. That's really dramatic, but I just think it's really cool to see how it played out, that like in both scenarios there was problems in her life wasn't perfect, but she ultimately ended up happy, and in both scenarios she had a life that she really loved. Second book that was my favorite of 2019, Defy Me by Tahereh Mafi. I rated this book 4 stars, not 5, but overall I think Shatter Me series is one of my favorite YA series. I mean, it's just so readable, so addicting, and if you have made it to this point in this series, you have been through a lot. I can't really say anything because I don't want to spoil it, but I will say for those people who have read it, there were a lot of emotional points in this book. There were a lot of like twists and turns that I was like, what in the world is happening in this series at this point? Shatter Me who? Not my Shatter Me. But it took me a lot of Restore Me to kind of get used to the new series, because if you didn't know, Shatter Me was originally a trilogy, and then Tahereh Mafi was like, you know what, we'll just make it 6 books. And so she wrote this next trilogy, which we're going to be getting the final book soon in this year. But Defy Me was number 5, and it was a journey. It was a journey. It made me think a lot. I still think a lot about it, and so that's why it has made a favorite. Even though I rated it 4 stars, I still think about it a lot, and these characters have really stayed with me. And I think about Warner and Juliet. Oh god, crazy kids. Next favorite is BookTube's favorite book of 2019, and of course it was one of my favorites too, Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This book is amazing. I absolutely loved it, just like everyone else. If you have somehow missed it or live under a rock or something, this book basically has to do with the first son of the United States falling in love with the Prince of England. And of course, it's a PR nightmare. There's scandal, there's politics, there's drama, there's romance. It has everything. It is so amazing, and especially in our political climate in the US right now, it was very comforting. I completely just like ran through this book. I could not stop reading it. It was so funny. So the romance in it was so sweet. It was just a really adorable book, and I was very impressed because Casey McQuiston, this is her debut novel, so I follow her. She's awesome. I can't wait to see what's next for this author because this was just an amazing, amazing debut. So, this is definitely a favorite. Next favorite was On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. If you are familiar with Angie Thomas, she wrote The Hate U Give, which was super successful. I had read that book in 2018, and then I read this book in 2019. This was the follow-up. It takes place in the same area of Garden Heights. It's like in the same kind of realm. Like they know of each other. She knows Star, the character in the first book, or she knows of her. So this book is about Bree, and her dad was an up-and-coming rap star, and then he was killed when Bree was really young. And so now Bree is 16, and she wants to be her own star, and she's has started rapping, but she's also dealing with the pressures of her school and what she's expected to do, and how the messages in her songs that she's rapping about conflict with the message that she wants to be sending, and she has to kind of realize throughout this book the messages that she's sending in her raps, how it affects people in her community and how it's also affecting her. So this was an extremely emotional read. I think every Angie Thomas book is just going to be a 5-star in the future and just make me cry. Like, those are two things that are guaranteed. Auto buy just to cry. And I definitely recommend the audiobook. The audiobook for Angie Thomas's books are absolutely amazing. And I especially recommend the audiobook for this book so that you can hear the rapping performed the way Angie Thomas meant it to be, because Angie Thomas used to be a rapper herself. So I think this book definitely has a lot of heart and soul poured into it from her experiences, and that definitely came through in the book. So this was an awesome, awesome read. I highly recommend it. For some reason you have not read it already, it is so great. If you liked The Hate U Give, you will love this one as well. And the other book that I wanted to mention was Rust and Stardust by T. Greenwood. Now this book was interesting because I first decided to get into it because I had heard that it was the real life case. It's a fictionalized version of the real life case that inspired Lolita. So it's like a fiction of a true crime of a fiction of a true crime. There's some layers to it, but if you have never read Lolita, this is one of my favorite books of all time, and people are always kind of like skeptical when they hear that from me. Maybe one day I'll post an in-depth review of why I love this book so much. It's heavy to read, but I love it so much. It has just always been one of my favorite books. It's a very it's a literary classic book. It's very controversial. A lot of people hate it, a lot of people love it and credit it as literary genius, and a lot of people think, oh, it's overhyped and it's not really worth the read. I personally love it, but what I thought was interesting with Rust and Stardust, which, if you didn't know, that's one of the famous quotes from one of the poems that the main character in Lolita writes in the book. But Rust and Stardust is a fictionalized version of a real case that happened that inspired Nabokov to write Lolita. So in this true crime case, there was a young girl, Sally Horner, who was abducted by an older man and pretty much just taken away from her family for years, and eventually she escaped and went back to her family. So this story, Rust and Stardust, is a fictionalized version of what really happened. And at first, it was really hard for me to get into. I didn't really care for it at first. It was kind of dragging on and on. But by the end of it, just the connections that it made to Lolita and being one of my favorite books of all time, and just I love hard hitting contemporaries. I love dark contemporaries, and I love true crime. And even though this book, I would not recommend it for everyone because it's not graphic in the things that happened to Sally, but it's definitely hard to think about all the pain that she went through being away from her family and just explaining how her mother and her family had gotten into this situation, that it was kind of the perfect storm that allowed her to be abducted by this man, and especially how tragic her life was when she returned from being abducted. And it was so sad, but it was so good. I mean, if you kind of like books like that, that it's sad, but in a good way, and it makes you like, it's that catharsis, I would definitely recommend. And the final book I want to talk about in the 2019 favorites video was my absolute favorite of the year. So, Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I just get so happy every time I look at this book cover. I love her. I love her so much. This was my absolute favorite book of the year, one of my new favorites of all time. Like I said, last year I read all of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books. I think this was the first one I read, and it was still my favorite. I started Evelyn Hugo and this one at the same time, and I remember I got this book on CD audio from the library because I was just so desperate, and everyone had said that the audiobook is the best thing ever, and they're right. And I remember vividly, I made a cup of coffee and I sat with the audiobook on CD and I just listened to it straight like all night long. And my mom came out, she's like, "What are you doing? You're still listening to this?" I was like, "I can't stop." I cried so hard. It was so good. This book is not for everyone. A lot of people, this is not their favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid books. A lot of people prefer Evelyn Hugo. I love Evelyn Hugo. She's great. But I just really connected in a special way with Daisy Jones. For one thing, I love 70s rock and roll. I love music. I love bands. I love books about bands and books about, you know, star-crossed lovers. Oh gosh. Oh. Every time I think about this book, I get emotional. Like, it is so good and it held such a place in my heart. But if you like 70s rock, and especially if you like Fleetwood Mac and Stevie Nicks, you have to read this book. You have to. It's required reading for you at this point because it's very heavily inspired by that. I think Taylor Jenkins Reid said she wanted to create like Stevie Nicks but cooler, if that's possible, but she really did. She did it. And it's just, oh gosh, it's so amazing. This book is set up as if it were a like kind of behind the band type thing where someone's interviewing the band and getting all the secrets and all the kind of like tell-all information of the band, because this book is about Daisy Jones, the main character, and she joins this rock band called The Six, and they were a super successful band in the 70s, but they ended up breaking up, and no one really knows the full extent of what happened behind the scenes. And this book is finally telling everyone after years and years of what has happened and why they broke up or why they disbanded. It was so good. I cannot wait for this to come out. Reese Witherspoon is turning it into an Amazon series, and I cannot wait for it to come out. I am so excited. I keep looking at the cast list. I can't wait to hear the songs. Oh, that's gonna be emotional for me. I can't wait. I love it so much. I can't say that enough. Again, I know not everyone's going to enjoy it. Not everyone's going to enjoy the format or the period of time, and not everyone's going to enjoy Daisy as a character because she's extremely flawed, and so is Billy. Billy. Oh my gosh, I can't like get through this without being silly, but I love this book so much. so heartbreaking and so heart-tugging and so heartwarming. Like, it really takes you through the full scale of heart emotions. Like, my heart was broken and mended and stomped on and warm all at the same time. So I cannot say enough good things about this book. If any of the things that I said sound interesting to you and you haven't read this book yet, I beg of you, please pick it up. You will not regret it, and I highly recommend listening to it on audiobook because it's a full cast audio and they do a really amazing job bringing these characters to life. So that was my favorites of 2019. I'm really looking forward to making this video again at the end of this year and seeing if some of the same authors pop up or if some of the same genres pop up. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 5 are contemporary and only one is like dystopian, sci-fi, any other genre. So I definitely read a lot of contemporary. I don't think that's something that's going to change. I do read other genres, but contemporary tends to be my favorite. I definitely clearly like books that have to do with music, and I think I like books that have a romance element to them. So it'll be really interesting to see what I end up liking this year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you enjoy the journey. Bye.